Hi everyone, and welcome back to another free session on homeowner maintenance and improvement education from Project Home. We're really glad to be able to bring you more of our sessions via our YouTube channel right now during this time. And we're so thankful that our sponsors are continuing to support this education effort for the public. So big ups to our sponsors and thank you for tuning in. Today we're going to be talking about strategies to prevent basement flooding, a big one this time of year. It's a great time to deal with a lot of these practices, to look at the maintenance that needs to be done and hopefully get it done before we start getting into too much rain. So that's why we wanted to get this out to you as soon as we can. I'm Jason Hafman. I'm the outreach manager at Project Home. I also led a number of volunteer-based projects on exactly this, ways to stop water intrusion into homes, into people's basements. And there are some different practices and rules to follow. Anyway, we'll try to cover the basics though today and give you some usable tools to correct these issues if you need to at your own home. Strategies to prevent basement flooding. Here we go. First of all, we'll talk about water in basements, and that we know it's a common issue. It's a common issue for a lot of homeowners. It's often caused by improper backfill and a lack of maintenance. So the ground around your foundation settling too much, water pooling. It's also a function of gutter performance as well. Those are some big things there. This is a great time to check the soil level around your house if you haven't yet. Fall and spring are great times to check it and address it before we get the snow in the winter, and of course before we get into a lot of rain and big storms during the summer. 96% of the water problems are actually due to poor control of roof and surface runoff. When the water hits our roof, when the water hits other areas close to our house, that the water is not draining away properly, we're not directing it away properly with our current setup or the way our systems are working, and that's the primary cause for most people. Again, the common culprits are clogged gutters, clogged or detached downspouts like you see in this photo, and also a negative grade around the foundation where the ground is either flat or sloping back toward the foundation. We need to have a positive grade where it's running away. We'll get into that in just a second. Big issues can be caused by water. It can cause damage to our home and belongings. Water intrusion, if it's a reoccurring issue, can be more serious with mold and bacteria growth, pest or insect infestations. There are certain insects that really like moisture and they can enter your house and cause more damage. And then also rot or rust of the framing of the building if this happens enough or too much. Improperly cleaning up after a water intrusion event, so water getting into your basement or your house, you can also create unhealthy living conditions even if it happens only once but you don't clean it up properly. So we've got some things. Basically the big point here I want you to take away from today is we want to address this on the outside of the house, and we want to prevent the water from getting to the foundation wall in the first place. Here's an example of settling. Pretty extreme, but this was a homeowner that I went to their house. They told me they were getting water in the basement, and I could see pretty quickly why. Now I thought initially, I took a tape measure to these areas, and this drop from the top of this foundation wall down to here was actually 9.5 inches. So I thought they just never filled in very well. But what actually happened was the contractor that helped create this setup, which was a new basement entrance, you can tell by the patio door here, a basement entrance for the home that was created that wasn't there before. So this ground was all disturbed, and then this was made, and it was a great addition to the house. But what happened was, in the backfill of this, I did see photos from it, from the original contractor photos, and the ground level was actually up to the top of this wall on their fill. It was to the top. So it had settled in a year and a half, 9.5 inches. That's how quickly something like this can happen, especially if we have freshly disturbed soil. So this is just an example of how quickly settling can occur. Here's some examples of maybe not as extreme settling, but on this one you can see a little mound here. See how it's settled towards the corner, settled toward this front stoop. This photo, it looks almost level or flat, but again, we need a positive grade sloping away. Flat, water is going to build and eventually run back towards the house. Why does settling continue? We're going to cover a few basics here before we jump into strategies. Well, the water continues to reach the foundation wall, runs down until it can find dry soil to absorb it. In that process, That dry soil then compacts, and then all the ground above it is going to settle and sink down with that. So that's why it continues to happen as long as water keeps getting back to that foundation wall and running down trying to find that dry soil. The big thing is we keep water running away from the foundation, and that will allow us to basically maintain our grade. Very little settling should happen once you're able to do that and set up appropriately. There may be some maintenance here or there, and you should still check it twice a year, like I said, but if we can get it set up properly and we don't have all that water getting to the foundation wall, we can pretty much eliminate major settling for the most part. There are a few other surprises sometimes. Sometimes animals create new landscaping for us that we didn't expect or didn't have in the plan, and we got to check those things too. So I just threw this in because I found this at a house that I went to. You can see dirt up against the siding in these photos, and that is something that can damage your siding, can create other problems. There's a rule we have to abide by when we're filling against our foundation wall. But if you ever see an animal disturb your soil or a flower bed or something like that, like this, you've got to get that dirt moved away and make sure that it's not up against your siding. Okay, how do we address this? Primarily, it's through landscaping. It can be done with soil, wheelbarrows, shovels, rakes, and a couple of extra hands if you have them. Building up around the foundation wall with shredded topsoil. You can get soil from a number of different places, and further on in the slides I've got some resources and places to get that from, to bulk order soil from. But if you buy bags that have been sitting there and they're clumpy, it's really difficult to deal with. If you get soil from certain places where they don't shred the soil first, it's very clumpy. Again, that makes this process much more difficult for you. It's also not going to be as effective because some of that soil that's clumped and compacted, you fill it in and you're trying to work that out, and then other areas will settle quicker than that clump soil, and you'll have more mounds and unevenness. So shredded topsoil, really important. Sorry if I stress that too much, but it is really important for the ease and the effectiveness of the project. And then you want to slope. There's kind of a rule here to follow. You want a slope of at least 1 inch drop per foot, extending out 6 feet from your building. The other thing I really stress, and I've done this with groups and people I've worked with, is compacting as you go. So I've seen people lay out, a bunch of soil, fill it to the level they want, and then try to compact it on the top with a tamper. So a manual tamper if you have that. Or you can rent those as well if you don't have one. If you do that, you're not going to be able to compact the soil properly that's inches below that top layer. Our strength and our ability to compact soil, we really want to be able to add a layer of soil, so 1 wheelbarrow dump, rake it out, kind of fill it in, start your slope, and compact each time you put soil down. That is going to prevent settling in the future, and it'll really help make sure that you have a great base underneath that top layer that you leave a little looser. So really important to compact as you go. Here's a great diagram to show you just some of the rules, and we'll go over that quick. It's from a friend, Don Robbins, who's a longtime building inspector, indoor air quality expert, water and mold expert as well, who shared a lot of this information with me and Project Home, and so I kind of built this session off of his information that he shared with us. This shows you a couple of things. Again, we talked about the drop of 1 inch drop per foot, 6 feet out extending from the building. Sometimes that's not possible, but whenever it is, you want to maintain that for sure. That's a minimum, okay? You can be a little bit even more of a slope if you want. All that means is the water is going to run away a little faster from the building. The other thing to look at here is maintaining a minimum of 2 inches. It says 2 to 4 inches, but a minimum of 2 inches of clearance between your highest layer of material and your siding. So if you're planting grass seed here, you can put the soil within 2 inches and then rake in your grass seed and you're good. If you're adding mulch on top of the soil, you need to factor that in. What's really important here is to make sure that after you put the layer of mulch on, you're still going to have 2 inches of clearance between your siding and that upper layer of your material. Stone, the same thing. Now stone does drain, but you don't want backsplashing off the stone when it rains to damage your siding either, so it's just good to keep that 2 inch rule regardless of what material you're putting there. Maintain that as you fill. If you don't follow the 2 inch rule, this kind of stuff can happen. You can see in this picture they've got ground right up to the siding level. There's damage to that siding, damage to the paint, paint's peeling faster, you got a hole in the corner here for critters to enter. This is the kind of stuff that can happen really easily if you're not following the 2-inch rule. So again, 2 inches between your lowest piece of siding, regardless of whether it's vinyl, wood, metal, whatever. You need to maintain that gap because for a number of reasons. The biggest one being whatever is behind that siding is still probably wood, and moisture is going to damage that. So even if you have metal or vinyl, you can't put the soil up against your siding. Just a couple of great examples of things. Look at this great grading away, really extend it out away from the house. That's beautiful if you can do that with your yard. The other thing with this one, I put this picture in because it has a front stoop. Now a lot of people think they don't have to deal with the front stoop necessarily because it's a few feet away from the house, but you still want to build up a grade against that stoop and have water run away. In this case, we had it up against here and ran it towards this sidewalk piece so I can continue on and drain away from the house. Because if water gets under that structure, you never know. That's oftentimes where it can find its way, it can compact underneath some of the base of that, and that's where you see porches that shift and crack and all of those things happening. This is Don Robbins, the person I talked about. He had a different method. I don't know if he created it or just adopted it and started using it, that he used for a long time when you don't have enough exposed foundation to build up your grade the way you want to. We've got to maintain the 2 inches below the siding, but what if we have higher ground that's further away from the siding and we need to raise our level at the siding higher than we can against the house because the siding is maybe down here? So how do we get that proper slope if our siding and our ground level don't mesh with maybe some ground level a little bit further out in the yard and we've got water running to the house that way? Well, this is a possible method to use, and it's become very effective. It's relatively inexpensive and relatively simple to do. Don talked about building a mini retaining wall and utilizing that to raise your soil level so you can get the bulk of the water running away from the house. And you can do that without tearing up the whole yard, redoing everything, tearing up all your grass and all your landscaping and everything else by utilizing this method. Now, he did it often with railroad ties or treated landscaping timbers. You could do a stone wall if you prefer. That's perfectly fine. It'll take you a little longer, probably be a little more expensive, but that's okay. That's a perfectly good option. You just want something that you can build the soil level up against that allows you to raise your soil level as high as you need to so you can actually get above your siding level if that's the situation at your house, which is very common in newer homes. Most newer homes don't have a lot of exposed foundation, and when we don't have that exposed foundation to play with, sometimes we got to use this method. Here's a good illustration of it. It's a little bit more extreme than when we usually use it in real life application, but the extreme of the diagram helps point out a few key factors. So one is, if you're going to put in this retaining wall, if that's what we need to do, because here you can see the siding level is down here. In order to get the grade the way we need to, we needed to raise the soil level way up to this point, which is well above the siding level. If we put this in, whether it's landscape timbers or stone, we need to maintain about a 6-inch gap between where we put the retaining wall and where the siding and foundation wall is. If it's a big timber, most of them, if it's like a 6x6 or even a 4x6, and you lay the 4x6 the wider way, so it's the 6x material, helps it be a little more stable. But when you set that in place with a little of fresh topsoil underneath to kind of let it balance and sink in, most of the time, once you build up the ground against it, it's a very stable surface and it works very well. Then you build your soil up against your retaining wall. Now you have your slope from here, from this area all the way away from the house, where the bulk of your water is going to hit that slope and run away. You do have a little 6-inch gap that you have to maintain there, but the amount of water that's going to get in there is not going to be much of a concern. Most of the time the ground should be able to absorb that, and it should not be an issue in almost all cases. And these are Don's recommendations, and he's done this a long time. This is more real life application of it that we did with some projects. Now you can see how extreme this looks. I mean, that looks like a huge gap and you're like, oh, that'll look unsightly maybe, or be kind of odd looking around my house. It actually, most of the time, it isn't quite that big of a height difference, and it doesn't look really odd. It looks pretty pretty much like some nice landscaping once you get it out there. You can fill in with a little gravel, lava rock, pea gravel, anything you want, stone-based in here, in that little gap to dress it up if you'd like as well, to make it kind of just more of your landscaping. So here are some projects that we did this with. You can see this was a house where we needed to get these timbers in place because we had to get the soil level up just a little bit higher than the lowest piece of siding. So again, you know, it wasn't extreme, but we needed something, because if we kept it 2 inches below the siding, we weren't fixing the issue. People are installing, they're tamping, and after we were just planting grass seed here, you can see the timber is about 6 inches away. They worked around the window wells, and then we were just planting grass seed in this area. But this worked extremely well. It's really effective. It fixed the issue. We filled in with some stone that we had as part of the project as well around the deck, and we just got some Madison wash stone to fill in there, and that's perfectly fine. Some sort of decorative draining material, and then no more problems with the water after that. There's also an option to solidify your retaining wall with wood even a little more. Now, most of the time, I mean, you're putting a big piece of 6x6 down and you're building up ground against it. You've got some material on the other side. That thing is going to be anchored in very, very well. However, if you really want to make that extra solid, you can drill holes through about every 2 to 3 feet and get these 2-foot stakes of rebar and actually just pound them through as stakes to anchor that in the ground just a little bit more. That's certainly an option for you. They sell 2-foot pieces at all kinds of hardware stores and Menards, Home Depot, all those. And you just you can do that certainly to make it a little bit more of a solid wall. But like I said, most of the time, if you're using a big piece of wood, it's not going anywhere once you put it in place. After we're done with this project, that's what it looked like. That's kind of some different approaches for dealing with the landscaping aspect and getting the grade and the soil where it needs to be, so we are getting all the bulk water that hits the ground running away from the house. Another big factor in this is your gutters and downspouts. And I know it seems kind of elementary, but these are things that people often don't think of, forget about, things that can happen very quickly with gutters and downspouts being damaged, being clogged, filling up with debris, all that sort of stuff. So it's not, it's something that we have to keep top of mind to make sure that we're continually checking on it, because all it takes is one big rainstorm where your gutters aren't working properly or something's plugged up, and then you've got water in the basement, and then you've got a lot more stuff to deal with. Making sure all your gutters and downspouts are clean, connected, and solidly attached to the house, really important, so they're working properly. You can check with the level, or you can, on a nice day if you want, take a hose, run some water up on the roof, see how it flows into the gutter. Sometimes you can have spots where it's dripping and running behind the gutter, where the drip edge from the roof is actually not directing the water into the gutter properly. And so that might give you some clues as to why your gutters aren't working right. You can also see how the water flows. So, you know, level certainly will tell you if things are level or not, or pitched properly or enough, but the water will tell you as well. So if you want to just experiment that way and see how it actually performs when you put some water up on the roof and in the gutter, it's a great way to do it, especially on a nice day, a nice spring day, something like that. If your gutters are sagging or not pitched right in some areas, sometimes you can pick up some additional fasteners. There are some great speed screw hangers, and I have a list with that on here as well a little bit later. But those are really easy to install on pretty much any type of gutter. They have a screw built into the hanger itself. It fits inside the gutter, so it wouldn't impact any sort of gutter screen or gutter guard that you have. And you can put them wherever you want. So you don't necessarily need to put it in the exact same spot of one of your old fasteners. Let's say you get a fastener strip out. It was maybe a nail through fastener or something like that, and the wood's no longer holding right in that spot. You can just leave that one, put a speed screw hanger close by to solidify and re-anchor the gutter, and you're good to go. So speed screw hangers are really, really efficient and great ways to solidify your gutter, make sure they're strong and stable against the house. A couple other key points about gutters and downspouts are, we really need to maintain, we're talking about that 6-foot rule about the slope of the ground. We want to extend downspouts 4 to 6 feet away from the foundation. So kind of hit that 6 foot mark again. We prefer 6 feet. 4 feet is fine because of the flow and because of the rate the water coming down. You know, sometimes what I like to do is, if you're going to extend some of your downspout extensions off of the bottom elbow that's at the base of your downspout, usually those extensions, or you can buy a piece of downspout extension that comes in a 10-foot length. So if you just cut that in half, you've got 2 downspout extensions from one downspout, 10-foot length that you have right there, and you've got 5 feet, which would be just fine. You can install gutter guards or screens to help keep debris out of your gutters. That's really important. You know, there are different types of screens out there. There are metal ones. There are ones you can actually attach to the gutter with screws. There are vinyl ones that really are pretty effective keeping all the big stuff out and are really easy to install. So those items are out there, and if you're in a place where you have a lot of debris that gets in your gutters, it's probably worth your time and money to get those things and install them properly, so you don't have to get up there and clean your gutters all the time, and you know they're going to work properly when you need them. If you have gutters that are, you know, 2.5 stories up or 2 stories up, you're not comfortable trying to install them, it is something you can reach out to a contractor to do. You know, it's really up to you, but if you feel up to it, you know, installing some of those is pretty simple. Basically, all you need to do is, especially for the vinyl ones that we put in a lot, is pry up the shingles just a little bit with a Wonder Bar or some type of bar that helps you get underneath the shingle enough to loosen it up. You push that up under the shingle a little bit and you pull it back toward the edge of the gutter, and it snaps right on and fits in place, and your gutter screens are installed. They usually come in 3 or 4 foot lengths. You want to overlap them a little bit. One nice trick is to actually cut a little bit of the snap piece off on each one and overlap by about 1 inch. That will give you added strength at the end at each connection point, and you won't have any gaps, and it'll make them more effective against little debris as well from getting in there. Now, Don had mentioned about just a point about underground drainage pipes. If you have those, his recommendation was to just abandon them and bring everything above ground. Maybe they work fine for you, maybe they have, but he has seen instances where people have gotten a frozen plug in that underground drainage piece, and you can't see that, you can't address it, and then you end up with the whole system backing up and then causing you an issue with a backflow water issue. At least if you have everything above ground, you can see it, you can address it, you can take care of it. So his recommendation was abandon those underground ones just to be safe and bring everything above the ground that you can see and access. Here's just some photos of people installing the PVC gutter screens that I talked about. Again, they just slide up underneath the shingles and then pull them back toward the edge of the gutter, and you've got them installed. They work really well, and these have lasted quite a long time for a number of people. Some people say they've put them up there 10 years ago and they're still doing fine. Over time, they will warp, you know, and they will need to, you might need to replace one here or there, something like that. But even in our harsh climate, they hold up pretty well and they do the job. Now, sometimes there are different things to address on our projects, right? They don't always go exactly how we hope. For this guy, of course they do, but for the rest of us, we have challenges or things to address. So just give you a couple of scenarios on that. This was a project we worked on, and there in the backyards we extended away from the house. There was a really high level of ground about 10 feet out. There's a mound there. And we really looked at, if we wanted to try to get it sloping past that mound, we would have had to raise the soil level up above this second piece of siding, and that was going to be a really big issue and difficult to do for our volunteers, but also a lot more material, a lot more height, a lot more awkwardness between the height of that and where you're going to dip down behind it in that 6 foot area between the retaining wall and the foundation wall. What we did notice in assessing this was there was this trench about 3 feet away from the house. It just kind of ran all the way here, which directed water from this point to the side yard, and then it could flow back toward the street. Now, we noticed that and we used it. So we built up ground in this 3 foot area to get the ground moving away from the house to that little trench and still water that hit this mound and ran toward the trench would collect, but then it's collecting there and running down to the side yard and still not going towards the house. This was a house that every time it rained, the homeowner had water in the basement. And she called me to tell me the first rain after we did our project, I think she called at 4 or 5 in the morning to let me know that she was just blown away that she didn't have water in her basement for the first time in years. It worked that well. And all we did here was install some landscape timber from here to there, from this corner by the garage to the window well. And then the rest of it, we were able to build up the grade enough and get our slope. And we planted grass seed and no more water problems. And she had called me 4 or 5 times since that point to tell me that she still couldn't believe she wasn't getting water in the basement anymore. So again, this can be done. And sometimes it's around the whole house, sometimes it's only parts of the house. This was the back of the house, we needed to do it, we addressed it, and no more water in the basement. So we're trying to impact this by preventing water damage to the house, eliminate those unhealthy living conditions caused by water in the basement, avoid those pests, keep them out of the house. We don't want them in our house, right? Because they can do a lot of damage, not just be bugs in the house, they can do damage to your home. A lot of them eat the wood or will do something to that that's damaging to the actual structure. And then we can prevent future repairs due to ground compacting and building settling in the future. So especially with those porches and things like that I mentioned. Concrete, if the base underneath the concrete settles, that concrete has no flexibility, no give, and you're just gonna have a crack and then something where it's gotta be all broken up and redone. And that's expensive and a lot of work. I really wanted to take this class and make it so you have all the tools you need to address the situation on your own if you want to. Now, if you want to hire somebody, I've got some resources for that too, and we'll share that with you. But anyway, this is if you want to do this yourself. Estimating soil, it's relatively simple, but just to go through the basics, I like to measure and slightly overestimate how many inches that you need to raise the soil level at the foundation wall. You want to check that first. Then you measure your square footage of the area that you're adding soil to, and maybe you're adding stone and mulch as well. Then what you need to do is estimate or calculate the average amount of soil you'll be adding to that complete area. So if that area is 20 feet wide, and let's say we're adding material for 4 feet, then we've got a 4 by 20 foot box that we're gonna be adding material in. In my example, numbers are pretty simple, but let's say we're gonna add 4 inches at the foundation wall. We wanna drop an inch per foot. We're coming out 4 feet from the house for material to kind of run into the existing slope that's at that 5 and 6 foot mark. And then what we need to do is kind of calculate that area when we're ordering soil. So the average rise or the average material fill for the whole box is going to be about 2 inches because we're 4 inches at the wall and we're nothing as we run into that 5 foot mark or 4 foot mark. And you can do that for different sides of your house if you're doing this around the whole house or different parts of the house. Take each side as its own area, calculate that area, add those together, and then you know how much soil or material you need to order, to bulk order from great places like Kalani Topsoil and people like that. This just kind of goes through that length, width, and depth to calculate your cubic yards. One nice thing is Kalani and some of the other places you can get soil from, they have a handy online calculator to make this easier for you. So you plug in your numbers. You just need to know that. You need to know your how big a rectangle this is. Plug in those numbers and then plug in your depth and they'll tell you how much you need right there. Again, do it for each section. It's good to overestimate just a little bit to make sure you have enough material to compact. Always better to have a little bit too much soil than not enough. You know, usually you're not going to hit it right on the head of a full cubic yard. So if you're at, 1.68 cubic yards of material that you need, just get 2 yards of material and you'll have plenty for that extra compaction that you might want to do as you tamp down the soil throughout the process of adding it. So here's a nice list of supplies you'll need if you're going to do this project on your own. We need shovels, garden rakes, tamper, wheelbarrow, gardening or working gloves, grass seed or a covering material, whether that's, and a covering material, excuse me. So grass seed, you always want to cover the grass seed to help it germinate faster. There's some things on that. And then if you're going to get landscaping material instead, mulch or stone. If you use stone, use about a mid-grade quality landscape fabric to prevent the weed growth. If you get the cheapest stuff, it's going to tear, it's not going to do very well. You can get the very expensive stuff, but I found that the mid-grade landscape fabric works pretty well, is pretty easy to deal with, and at the same time, you're not overspending or overdoing it. So some other supplies you'll need, in this case, if you didn't have enough exposed foundation, we need to do the retaining wall idea, would be all the other things are on the previous slide. But in addition to that, we need pressure treated green or ground contact lumber. Very important to make sure it's either green, AC2 treated, or it says ground contact lumber. 4x6s or 6x6s are what I prefer. Railroad ties are an alternative that can be cheaper sometimes, but they don't last as long. They're not going to hold up as well or as long as the pressure treated lumber. You need a miter saw or some type of saw, maybe a chainsaw, circ saw. Again, this is outdoor landscaping, retaining wall. It doesn't have to be a thing of beauty or exactly precise as finished carpentry. Now you can make it beautiful if you want, that's cool, but basically you just need something to cut the lumber at the lengths you need it and then go from there. If you're staking through, again, drill bits, one key point about drill bits is making sure you have a long enough drill bit to get through your material. Those 6x6s, you'll need a little bit longer drill bit than is commonly sold. The sections of rebar if you want, and a sledgehammer for putting those in if you're going to do the rebar to stake it through. Screw gun, of course you'll need that, and washer head lag screws. GRK fasteners, like I said before, or SPACs are the ones I prefer for those. Those are all-purpose, can be used in treated lumber, can be used outside, and they work really well. They have like a pre-drilling tip, although again I prefer to pre-drill just to at least some type of hole before I fire those in, because I don't want to split any of this expensive big wood that I've cut and gotten delivered and cut to size and all that. Okay, here's where you can find some materials. We have some great companies locally that will sell you bulk materials, deliver it right to your driveway, right to your house. Kalani Topsoil is one I've worked with for a long time. Great people, they're very helpful, easy to deal with, especially if you haven't ordered materials before, maybe you don't know exactly what you need. They'll help you, walk you through it. These other companies are very good as well. There are others, but these are some that I've worked with and had really good experiences. Earthscapes, Madison Topsoil, Circle B Landscape. Again, all will deliver to your home. And as far as some of the materials, your local hardware store should have basically all this stuff for you: shovels, rakes, tampers, wheelbarrows. One benefit I found about getting a wheelbarrow in particular from a local hardware store is they usually have them assembled already for you. So you can take that off your plate. You don't have to get the wheelbarrow in a box and assemble it if you don't want to, because they usually have them assembled, tires pumped up, ready to go. You can just grab that wheelbarrow, buy it, and walk out the door with it. Gutter supplies, most local hardware stores will have what you need. Some of them may need to order some of the supplies, so you might want to call first. Of course, you can buy this stuff at Home Depot, Menards, Lowe's. The one tricky point is a lot of times they're not selling magnetized gutter screws. And magnetized gutter screws are a beautiful thing when you're trying to install elbows, downspouts, anything with that's your connecting sections of the downspout or elbows or extensions off of those elbows, because you're using small little screws, little zip screws, and what happens is if that's not magnetized and you're trying to hold this and you put the screw in your bit and you're trying to screw that in and it keeps falling out because it's not magnetized, it gets really frustrating, especially if you're up on a ladder trying to do that stuff. So magnetized gutter screws, check to make sure they're selling you magnetized gutter screws before you buy a little bag of those, whether they're white or brown or whatever gutter material you're working with. Some estimated costs. Now this is general. There are differing costs for differing businesses, and a lot of times the cost kind of depends on the amount you're ordering in some cases. But shredded topsoil, I've seen it anywhere between $35 to $65 a yard. Sometimes it might be a little more than that. Wash stone, Madison wash stone number 2 is different than River Rock but certainly less expensive. So River Rock has a little bit more dark tones in it, some black and grayish rocks, some red, some more red tones in there as well. Madison Wash Stone still has some variation. It maybe doesn't have quite as variation in tone, but it's substantially cheaper. So I think it still looks nice. I use it on all my projects that we've done. People have liked it just fine. So that would be a less expensive option. But if you want the River Rock or something more expensive, certainly your choice. Twice shredded mulch is really important. If you're bulk buying, ask if they're running it through the shredder 2 times, if it's twice shredded or not. It just makes it easier to deal with, easier to spread. It's not clumping up and getting caught up on your shovels and your rakes and all that. It's just a lot easier to work with. Your wheelbarrow can range substantially in price depending on how big a wheelbarrow you want, whether you want two wheels on it, a single wheel, and then whether it's what type of box it is, if it's a metal bucket or if it's a plastic one. But generally you can get a good wheelbarrow for around $50 or so, $45, $50. And then shovels and rakes, again, can depend on what you're looking at, but somewhere in the $10 to $30 range. Soil tampers, if you're going to do more of this, I mean, it's a handy tool to have around, but like I said, you can rent those or you can buy one. The treated 4x6s and 6x6s, I put this on here because there's some weird things to know about, like lengthwise in the cost per foot. So for some reason, 4x6s are cheapest in 10-foot lengths, and 6x6 treated timbers are cheapest in 8-foot lengths. They have many various lengths that you can get, but if you get the 8-footers of 6x6s, they're actually less expensive. And if you get the 10-footers of 4x6s, that is your best value for it if you need those lengths. So anyway, you can calculate that, figure out what works for you and all that, but just a quick tip. 2-foot pieces of rebar are available in 3/8 inch diameter, also 1/2 inch diameter. Either is perfectly fine. Just get the appropriate drill bit size to match that. And then your gutter supplies. Here's just some things you'll want to know about if you're doing gutters from scratch or if you're replacing some things with the downspouts and extensions and all that. The speed screw hanger is what I told you about before. That's for helping to fasten the gutter to the fascia board. You've got downspouts, again, coming in those 10-foot lengths generally. You have different outlets, end caps for the edges of your gutters, which need to be sealed, elbows that help kind of change direction for you off of the downspouts, coming to the downspout and coming off of the downspout. The zip screws, a bag of 100 is a couple bucks, $2, $3. Pipe band is just those straps to help attach the downspout to the house. And then gutter sealant, you definitely want that to seal up around any openings or holes in your gutters or downspouts. Key point, call Diggers Hotline before you do any of this stuff, especially if you're doing any digging of any sort. You really want to do that just to mark the property, just to be safe. If you're using shovels, call Diggers. You can also set up a Diggers Hotline request online if you prefer to do it that way. But again, the number 811 Diggers Hotline, look them up online. You can find that easier. The website portal here is for an online request, but if you just type it into a search engine, you can find that really quickly as well. Before you go to the website or call, just make sure you have some information. You can look that up on the line, what they want online, what they want from you when you're making a request. So you can be a little more prepared for that. And so, the call's more efficient for you, for them. Or if you're doing it through the web portal, just look up a few things in advance, kind of look into that. What do they want to know from me, and give them those specifics. And then once your property is marked, the markings are legal for 10 days, 10 calendar days, not business days. So if you don't complete your project in that time, you should call to have your property remarked. A few final notes. The quality of your topsoil matters greatly in a couple of things. The easiness it is to work with, and also how stuff grows in it, whether it's grass or anything else. It can be fewer weeds, better growth with grass or plants or whatever you're using it for. So shredded topsoil and getting it from a good, reputable place, really important. If you're planting the grass seed, be sure to cover it and then water it once a day. If you have covering on it, watering once a day is enough. And then extra hands make these projects go quicker and easier. So keep that in mind too. If you're not looking at doing this yourself, but you want to look at some great landscaping companies that you might want to hire and reach out to, again, they're currently working still during this time of course. Here are some very good ones to check in with. Highly recommend any of them. I've worked with all of them, know the owners, great people, great businesses, great local businesses and companies. And then some gutter companies as well. This is all they do is gutters. There's a lot of companies that do different projects and gutters. These are specific gutter companies. It's all they do. So they're very good to start with there. And again, they're not working around other projects, remodeling projects and trying to squeeze your gutter project in. They've got gutter projects. That's what they do. Thank you so much for this. I'll leave you with our information. And as we just kind of close this up, I want to say this is a great time to address the situation. If you've had problems in the past, and you haven't done anything, you've kind of lucked out, or maybe you haven't had any water intrusion yet. Again, it's walking around, checking every area around your foundation to look for any sort of settling, which can happen at any time. And with more extreme weather and some of the flooding we've had in the past, you want to protect yourself as much as possible. And these are things that can help protect your house from getting water intrusion in it and damage that then is a whole nother thing to deal with. I encourage you to monitor this, to maintain it, and to try to take these steps or reach out to good companies that can address it for you if that's what needs to be done. Thanks again for checking out our series of videos and your interest in our home maintenance and improvement education. We do have more classes on the slate in the summer and the fall, and we're hoping to be doing that in person at libraries as we move forward. But for now, be safe, stay well, and thanks again to our sponsors for supporting this effort, bringing you information. Take some of the time we have now, if we have it, and tackle some of these projects if you can. It's really important.